The year is 1984. The music industry is undergoing a seismic visual revolution. The promotional clip, once a mere afterthought for record labels, has mutated into the single most powerful marketing tool on the planet, entirely dictating the rise and fall of popular artists. At the absolute center of this revolution is MTV, a relatively new 24-hour cable television network broadcasting from New York City that has rapidly become the undisputed kingmaker of the American market. If MTV puts a video in heavy rotation, that song becomes a guaranteed platinum smash. If MTV ignores it, the track dies a quiet death on the Billboard charts. The network's executives hold unprecedented power over what American youth listen to, what they wear, and how they perceive rock and roll. In this highly charged, hypervisual era, image is no longer just a companion to the music. It is the entire package. Across the Atlantic, the British rock band Queen is in a complex and somewhat precarious position regarding their standing in the United States. To understand the sheer magnitude of what happened in 1984, we have to rewind slightly to the late 1970s and early 1980s. During that golden period, Queen essentially owned the American airwaves. They had conquered the massive stadium circuit across North America, delivering spectacular theatrical performances that cemented Freddie Mercury as one of the greatest rock frontmen in human history. Tracks like Bohemian Rhapsody, We Will Rock You, and We Are the Champions had become woven into the very fabric of American culture. When they released the bass-driven, disco-infused Another One Bites the Dust in 1980, it became an absolute juggernaut in the States, crossing over to R&B radio and spending weeks at the #1 spot. Queen was an unstoppable commercial force, but the American musical climate was famously fickle. In 1982, Queen released the album Hot Space. Heavily influenced by the dance and funk scenes they had frequented in Munich and New York, the album leaned hard into synthesizers and drum machines, largely sidelining Brian May's signature soaring guitar work. For the hardcore American rock audience, this was a step too far. The aggressive backlash against disco was still fresh in the American consciousness, and rock radio programmers felt alienated by the band's new direction. Sales dropped significantly. Adding fuel to the fire was their very first major clash with MTV. For the Hot Space single body language, Queen shot a video set in a dimly lit, steamy bathhouse. It featured writhing, sweat-slicked models clad in minimal clothing and tight leather. Despite the fact that the band members themselves were fully clothed, MTV executives balked at the homoerotic undertones and the sheer amount of skin on display. They officially banned body language from their network. It was the very first time MTV had ever banned a music video. Ironically, the controversy generated enough underground buzz that the song still managed to crawl its way into the American Top 30, but a distinct fracture had been created between Queen and the conservative gatekeepers of American media. The band felt misunderstood, while the network viewed them as a potential liability. By the time 1984 rolled around, Queen knew they needed a massive return to form. They returned to the studio to record their 11th album, simply titled The Works. The objective was clear: recapture the classic hard-hitting rock sound that had defined their 70s output, while seamlessly integrating the electronic elements they had been experimenting with. They wanted to deliver an album filled with undeniable stadium-ready anthems, and they succeeded brilliantly. The album featured massive tracks like Radio Gaga, which was already generating massive buzz, but it was a song written by their typically quiet bassist, Deacon, that would inadvertently alter the course of their career in America forever. The song was called I Want to Break Free. On a musical level, it is a masterclass in pop rock songwriting. It features a relentless, driving synthesizer bass line, a brilliant guitar solo by Brian May, and a vocal performance by Freddie Mercury that is both vulnerable and fiercely defiant. Lyrically, the song is a straightforward declaration of independence. It is about the universal desire to escape from a stifling relationship, a restrictive environment, or a societal expectation. There is absolutely nothing explicitly controversial, racy, or aggressive in the lyrics or the musical composition. It is, by all accounts, a perfect radio-friendly pop anthem. The band knew they had a guaranteed global hit on their hands, but in 1984, a hit song required an unforgettable music video. Queen had a long-standing reputation for taking the music video medium very seriously. Ever since they practically invented the modern promotional clip with Bohemian Rhapsody in 1975, they had continuously pushed the boundaries of the format with dramatic lighting, elaborate sets, and serious, grandiose imagery. But drummer Roger Taylor was growing incredibly bored with the intense, self-serious nature of rock videos at the time. He felt the band was in danger of becoming too predictable, too heavy. He suggested they do something completely different, something lighthearted, and above all, something funny. The idea that emerged was deeply, inherently British. Taylor proposed that the band dress in drag and film, a parody of the long-running television soap opera Coronation Street. To understand why this made perfect sense to Queen, and why it completely baffled America, one must understand the stark differences between British and American comedic traditions. In the United Kingdom, cross-dressing has been a staple of mainstream, family-friendly entertainment for centuries. From the pantomime dames of the Victorian era to the television sketches of Monty Python's Flying Circus and the Two Ronnies, men putting on women's clothing for comedic effect was a standard, entirely unscandalous trope. It was viewed as a bit of harmless, cheeky fun. No one in Britain associated comedic drag on television with gender politics or sexual orientation. It was simply a classic comedic device. America, however, had a very different cultural landscape in the mid-1980s. The country was in the midst of the conservative Reagan era. The mainstream rock scene was dominated by an aggressively macho, hyper-heterosexual attitude. While heavy metal and hair bands were beginning to wear spandex, tease their hair, and apply heavy makeup, it was strictly contextualized within a performative, aggressive rock and roll rebellion aimed specifically at attracting female groupies. True, unapologetic cross-dressing, especially by a band that did not explicitly belong to the glam rock subculture, was viewed with deep suspicion and often outright hostility. But Queen, operating out of London and operating on their own creative wavelength, did not consider the American perspective when they began planning the shoot. They were simply focused on executing a brilliant joke. In May of 1984, the band gathered at Limehouse Studios in Battersea, London, to shoot the video. They hired director David Mallet, who had previously worked with David Bowie and was known for his sharp cinematic eye. The budget was set at a staggering £100,000, a massive sum for a music video at the time. The set designers meticulously recreated the cramped working-class aesthetic of a mid-terraced house, specifically mimicking the interior sets of Coronation Street. The commitment to the bit was absolute, and the costume choices were highly specific, targeted parodies of well-known British television archetypes. Guitarist Brian May, standing well over 6 feet tall, was dressed as the classic haggard housewife, complete with fluffy pink rabbit slippers, a floral dressing gown, and a head entirely covered in hair curlers. Bassist John Deacon, the quietest member of the band, sat completely stone-faced on the sofa, dressed as a deeply conservative, grumpy elderly woman reading the newspaper. Roger Taylor, who possessed somewhat delicate facial features, was placed in a classic British schoolgirl uniform, causing quite a stir among the crew because of how alarmingly convincing he looked in the outfit. And then there was Freddie Mercury. Freddie's approach to the parody was entirely unique and subverted the joke even further. He dressed as a tardy, flirtatious housewife, wearing a tight black leather miniskirt, a garish pink sleeveless top over a severely pointed bra, fishnet stockings, and high heels. He carried a heavy vacuum cleaner, aggressively hoovering the carpet while passionately lip-syncing to the track. But the true genius of Freddie's costume, and the element that made it so surreal, was that he refused to shave off his thick, dark, trademark mustache. This single stylistic choice completely shattered the illusion of the drag. He wasn't trying to convincingly look like a woman. He was a highly masculine rock star, wearing a woman's outfit, while completely retaining his masculine facial features. It was bizarre, hilarious, and utterly mesmerizing. The drag sequence, however, was only the first part of the video. The shoot expanded into a freezing, cavernous warehouse located right next to the main studios. Here the band invited hundreds of members from their official fan club to act as extras. These fans were dressed in dark, heavy boiler suits and hard hats, creating a dark, industrial, almost dystopian atmosphere that starkly contrasted with the brightly colored living room of the previous scene. It is worth noting the historical context here. The United Kingdom was in the middle of the bitter, devastating miners' strike of 1984. While Queen never explicitly stated it was a political commentary, the imagery of hundreds of people dressed as miners trapped in a dark space while Freddie sang about wanting to break free carried a heavy, unavoidable resonance for the British public. The fan club members spent hours in the freezing cold, standing in awe as they watched their idols perform inches away from them. But Freddie Mercury was not finished. He wanted to elevate the video from a simple comedy sketch into a genuine piece of high art. For the middle section of the song, the soaring instrumental break, Freddie conceptualized a grand theatrical ballet sequence. He reached out to the prestigious Royal Ballet and enlisted the help of choreographer Wayne Eagling. Freddie had become obsessed with the legendary Russian dancer Vaslav Nijinsky, and specifically his groundbreaking, controversial choreography for the ballet L'après-midi d'un faune. Freddie wanted to recreate this historic piece on camera. This required a massive physical and artistic commitment. Freddie, who had never been formally trained in dance, spent intense, grueling hours rehearsing with the professional dancers of the Royal Ballet. He famously shaved off his beloved mustache for this specific sequence to properly inhabit the role of the mythical faun. When the cameras rolled, Freddie, dressed in a spotted leotard, threw himself into the performance, being lifted into the air by the male dancers and executing complex athletic movements. It was a stunning display of his boundless artistic ambition. The video essentially contained 3 completely different movies packed into a 4-minute runtime: a gritty industrial scene, a breathtaking classical ballet, and a hilarious sitcom parody. When the editing was finished and the final cut of I Want to Break Free was released to the world, the global reaction was explosive. In the United Kingdom, the video was an instant cultural phenomenon. The British public immediately recognized the Coronation Street references, they understood the pantomime humor, and they loved the song. It rocketed to the number 3 spot on the UK singles chart and stayed in the top 10 for weeks. Across Europe, the reaction was exactly the same. The video played non-stop on television programs in Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. In South America, a region Queen had aggressively cultivated a few years prior, the song transcended pop music and was adopted as a genuine political anthem. In countries suffering under oppressive military dictatorships, the lyrics I Want to Break Free, coupled with the band's sheer defiance of norms, resonated deeply with millions of people. It became the soundtrack for democratic movements across the continent. But then, the videotape arrived at the corporate offices of MTV in New York City. The reaction was not laughter, nor was it admiration for the artistic ballet sequence. The reaction was sheer panic. The executives sitting in the screening rooms had absolutely no idea what Coronation Street was. They had no context for the British tradition of comedic drag. They did not see a brilliant, self-deprecating parody of soap opera tropes. What they saw was 4 of the biggest rock stars in the world inexplicably wearing women's clothing, with the lead singer heavily made up, wearing a leather skirt and a thick mustache, vacuuming a living room. In the conservative, hyper-masculine environment of 1980s American rock television, this was completely radioactive. The hypocrisy of the situation was staggering. MTV was currently playing videos by bands like Mötley Crüe, Rat, and Poison on a continuous loop. These were bands entirely built around men wearing heavy foundation, eyeliner, lipstick, high heels, and elaborate women's clothing. But because the hair metal bands projected an aura of aggressive, predatory heterosexuality, the network completely accepted their cross-dressing as standard rock theater. Queen, however, had always operated with a level of theatrical ambiguity. Freddie Mercury's sexuality was a subject of constant tabloid speculation, and the band refused to play by the standard rules of rock machismo. Therefore, their use of drag was not viewed as a harmless rock and roll costume. It was viewed as a dangerous, subversive, and potentially alienating display that threatened the core demographic of the network. MTV made a swift and decisive executive decision. They completely banned the video for I Want to Break Free from their programming. It was not placed in late-night rotation. It was not censored. It was completely erased from the network. This decision acted as a massive kill switch for the song's commercial viability in the United States. In 1984, radio stations heavily relied on MTV to dictate what songs were gaining traction with the youth market. When MTV blacklisted the video, major market radio programmers across America immediately got the message. They pulled the single from their playlists, fearing a backlash from conservative listeners. The results were catastrophic for Queen's standing in America. While I Want to Break Free was dominating charts and filling stadiums in every other corner of the globe, the single completely stalled out in the United States. It barely managed to scrape its way to number 45 on the Billboard Hot 100 before completely dropping off the charts. The momentum that the band had hoped to rebuild with the Works album was completely shattered by the network's refusal to air a simple comedy video. The band members were absolutely furious. Freddie Mercury, who had poured his heart into the ballet sequence and considered the video to be a triumphant piece of pop art, felt deeply insulted by the American reaction. In interviews, he expressed intense frustration at the narrow-mindedness of the American media establishment. He pointed out the blatant double standard regarding the hair metal bands and felt that Queen was being unfairly punished for simply having a sense of humor. Brian May was equally disappointed, realizing that the network's inability to understand a British joke had cost them their biggest market. Roger Taylor, who had conceptualized the video in the first place, was baffled by the intense pearl-clutching reaction from a country that prided itself on freedom of expression. The fallout from the MTV ban was not just a temporary setback. It resulted in a permanent, historic shift in Queen's touring strategy. As the band geared up for the Works World Tour in late 1984, they sat down with their management to root the massive undertaking. They looked at the spectacular ticket sales in Europe. They looked at the massive demand in South America, Japan, and Australia. And they looked at the complete radio silence in the United States. The decision was unanimous. They completely crossed North America off the map. Queen embarked on a massive, record-breaking global tour that saw them play to hundreds of thousands of people in stadiums across the world. They played a highly controversial string of shows in Sun City, South Africa. They headlined the legendary Rock in Rio Festival in Brazil, playing to over 300,000 people in a single night, cementing their status as gods in South America. They toured through Europe, delivering some of the tightest, most powerful performances of their career. But they never brought the stage set, the lighting rig, or the music to the United States. The original lineup of Freddie Mercury, Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon would never, ever tour American soil again. The relationship had been completely severed over a vacuum cleaner, a leather skirt, and a failure to understand a joke. Queen did not need America to survive. The following year, in 1985, they walked onto the stage at Wembley Stadium for the Live Aid concert and delivered 20 minutes of pure, unadulterated magic that completely stole the show and is widely considered the greatest live rock performance in history. They proved to the entire world that they were still the undisputed champions of stadium rock. But the American market remained a strange, quiet gap in their dominance for the rest of the decade. It wasn't until many years later, under vastly different circumstances, that America finally remembered how much they loved Queen. In 1992, the Mike Myers comedy film Wayne's World featured a legendary sequence of the main characters headbanging to Bohemian Rhapsody in a car. The scene became a massive cultural touchstone and sent the song rocketing back to the #2 spot on the Billboard charts, introducing Queen to an entirely new generation of American teenagers. Tragically, Freddie Mercury had passed away just months before the film's release, never getting to witness the full scale of the American public finally re-embracing his band. Today, the controversy surrounding I Want to Break Free seems almost comically absurd. The music video is easily accessible on YouTube, boasting hundreds of millions of views. It is universally recognized not as a dangerous piece of subversive media, but as an iconic, brilliant piece of pop culture history. It stands as a vibrant document of a band that possessed the rare confidence to not take themselves too seriously, even when they were at the top of the world. The song itself has long outgrown its original context. It is no longer just a track on an 80s rock album. It is a global anthem of self-expression, utilized in films, television shows, and political movements. For the LGBTQ+ community, Freddie Mercury's defiant, unapologetic performance in the video remains a powerful symbol of liberation and living life entirely on one's own terms, regardless of what the gatekeepers of society might think. The story of how MTV hid Queen from America in 1984 is a stark reminder of the immense, unchecked power that media conglomerates held in the pre-internet age. It shows how a single decision by a handful of executives in a boardroom could completely derail a legendary band's career in an entire country based purely on a cultural misunderstanding. But more importantly, it proves that true artistic brilliance cannot be permanently suppressed. The network tried to banish the song, but the song ultimately outlived the network's relevance. Queen remained entirely true to themselves. They refused to compromise their creative vision to appease conservative executives, and history has overwhelmingly vindicated them. If you are fascinated by the hidden stories, the controversies, and the untold history behind the greatest music ever recorded, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We are constantly digging deep into the archives to bring you the truth about the bands that changed the world. Leave a comment below and tell me, do you think MTV was right to ban the video based on the cultural climate of the 1980s, or were they just completely narrow-minded? Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you in the next documentary. To really comprehend the sheer scale of the missed opportunity in America, we have to look closely at what the Works Tour actually looked like. When Queen took this show on the road, it wasn't just a rock concert, it was an industrial spectacle. The stage design was directly inspired by Fritz Lang's groundbreaking 1927 science fiction film, Metropolis. The backdrop featured massive, rotating, illuminated cogwheels and a sprawling, brightly lit, retro-futuristic cityscape. The lighting rig was completely computer-controlled, a massive technological leap for the mid-80s, allowing the lights to pulse and sequence in perfect automated synchronization with the thunderous drum fills and explosive guitar solos. They built elaborate modular platforms and extended catwalks that allowed Freddie to sprint out over the audience, manipulating the crowd with the effortless grace of a master conductor. The setlist was a blistering combination of their hardest 70s rock and their slickest 80s pop. They brought back heavy, complex early tracks like Great King Rat and 7 Seas of Rye, proving that despite the synthesizers, they could still outplay almost any heavy metal band on the planet. And when they played I Want to Break Free live, the crowd reaction was deafening. Freddie would often emerge on stage wearing the full drag outfit from the video, complete with the giant fake breasts under a sweater, strutting across the stage and playfully teasing the audience. The fans outside of America absolutely adored the theatrics. They understood that rock and roll was supposed to be theatrical, rebellious, and a little bit ridiculous. But imagine dropping that Metropolis-themed stage set into the middle of Madison Square Garden or the Los Angeles Forum in 1984. American audiences were starving for exactly that level of stadium rock supremacy. The American charts were dominated by artists pushing visual boundaries like Madonna, Michael Jackson, and Prince. Queen fit perfectly into that pantheon of larger-than-life pop royalty. Had MTV simply put the video into regular rotation, allowing the American public to realize it was a joke, the works could have easily sold millions of copies in the States. The subsequent tour would have been an absolute blockbuster, easily rivaling the biggest tours of the decade. Instead, American arenas were filled by other bands, while Queen conquered stadiums in Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro, and London. The tragedy is not just that Queen lost money or chart positions. The tragedy is that millions of American rock fans were deprived of seeing the greatest live band in the world, operating at the absolute peak of their visual and musical powers. Freddie Mercury's vocal performances during the Works Tour were staggering. He was navigating complex staging, dealing with a lingering knee injury, and yet he was delivering vocal acrobatics night after night that most singers couldn't achieve on their best day in a recording studio. By the time they finished the tour in May of 1985, they were a remarkably well-oiled machine, completely primed and ready to dominate the Live Aid broadcast just 2 months later. There is an incredible irony in the fact that the very thing that alienated the American media establishment, the flamboyant, theatrical, unapologetically bold embrace of drag and queer aesthetics, is exactly what makes Freddie Mercury an immortal icon today. In the decades since his passing, society has shifted dramatically. What was considered dangerous and subversive in 1984 is now celebrated. The idea of an artist playing with gender presentation, challenging the rigid boundaries of masculinity, and refusing to apologize for it, is now seen as deeply heroic. Freddie Mercury was simply operating a decade ahead of his time, and the conservative gatekeepers of American television simply did not possess the cultural vocabulary to understand him. The video for I Want to Break Free is the ultimate testament to a band that refused to be put in a box. They were heavy metal pioneers, they were disco hitmakers, they were stadium anthem writers, and they were also 4 guys willing to dress up like British housewives to get a laugh. They possessed a fearlessness that is incredibly rare in the highly calculated, heavily manicured world of the modern music industry. They didn't care about looking tough, they only cared about being brilliant. So the next time you hear that iconic synthesizer bass line kick in, or you see the image of Freddie Mercury aggressively vacuuming a carpet in a pink top. Remember the story behind it. Remember the panic it caused in corporate boardrooms. Remember the massive tour that America missed out on. And most importantly, remember that true rock and roll isn't about conforming to what the mainstream expects. It's about breaking free from it entirely. Thank you so much for watching. Making these deep dives into rock history takes an enormous amount of research and passion, so if you enjoyed this script, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Share this video with a fellow music lover, and tell me in the comments, what is your favorite Queen music video of all time? Keep rocking, and I'll see you next time.